Hi, my name's Jared Davis and I'm going to demonstrate how you can use Adobe Photoshop to frame a picture without actually having to frame it. So it can be handy sometimes when you want to create, a visualized framed image using Photoshop, especially when you may not have visualization software, or if most visualization software packages don't offer a high definition image, which that's where Photoshop can be really helpful, where you can actually create a professional print quality high definition visualized image, which is very useful for marketing resources and things like that. So here's an example that we're going to actually create in Photoshop, but let's create it from scratch. We're going to start with the photo and we'll start with an image of the molding, and then we'll construct it as we go from there. So I'll close this off, and then I'm going to open up an image of our molding here, and I'll also open up the photo. So here's the source photo, and this is what we want to frame up, and here's our molding. Now, the first thing we need to look at and to see what the quality image size is for our photo. So if we look at image size, we can see, I'll just bring this up over here. It's a 300 dpi image, and it's about 1200 pixels. So that's definitely high definition. 300 dpi is high definition. If it was quality for computer, it would be 72 pixels per inch. Here we've got our image size for our molding, and that's also 300 dpi, I can see there as well. Alright, so coming back to the image here, first of all, it's just a flattened layer, so I'm going to turn that into a manageable layer. So I'm going to go right click, layer from background, and then go OK. So that will now allow me to add extra layers to this particular item. What I want to do is increase the canvas size so I can add a matte and molding and such to that as well. A couple of ways we can do that. The easiest way is probably use your cropping tool. Clear the options here. Select this. Now I'm going to zoom out with the mouse. I've configured in my preferences that the mouse zoom will work for me, which is a handy thing to do if you're not familiar with Photoshop or haven't used that before. Set your mouse zoom to work in your preferences so you can zoom in and out, which I use quite a bit. I'm going to hit enter to lock that in. So that's given me a bit of space to work with. If I come back to my picking tool, I can now move things around. Now I want some of this molding here. In order to get that molding, if I click on this, it's all one flattened image. I might have sourced this photograph, say, from your molding supplier, or you might have taken a photo of the molding itself. First of all, what I'll do is I'll change that from a background to a layer. I might use my magic wand here to help me select the outside area of that molding, which then I can delete using the delete key. So then I'm just going to get molding itself, and I can take a selection of this using my selection rectangle tool. I'm going to select that and then copy this. So Control C to copy, move over here, Control V to paste. Now if the scale of that molding is different to the size of the image, which it commonly can be depending on how you've taken the photo and what distance, we can always scale that down. So we can scale the layer down if we go to Edit, Transform, Scale. Click on the chain lock to maintain the aspect ratio, and we can scale this down to the size that may be relative to the size of the molding relative to the image. Alternatively, I could have also had selected the layer for the image itself. By the way, I keep this box here auto select ticked so that I can select layers without having to go over here to select my layers. So I can just click on an image and that will automatically select a layer. So here I could have also gone Edit, Transform, Scale, maintain the aspect ratio, and then scale that down as well to suit. Then hit Enter to lock it in. So that's now a separate layer for that molding. If the molding photograph that you've taken wasn't quite straight, or you don't know if it was straight or not, one of the handy tools in Photoshop that most people aren't aware of, if you go to your magic wand tool, nope, must be here. Here it is. Right click on your eyedropper tool, click on the ruler tool, and ruler will let you draw a line. So if I zoom right in here, I can click here and then draw a line down to here. and then click on straighten, and that will automatically then straighten that up, that particular layer. You can't see that happen because I was zoomed in, but it now made that absolutely perpendicular. That's a very handy tool, the ruler tool. So now we've got the molding selected here. I'm going to leave that here for now. I'll bring the picture back to the middle of the screen. I want to add some mat boards to the picture first. So for that, I'm going to add some layers. So we're going to go Layer, New, and we go OK. So we've got an extra clear layer at the moment here. And with that layer, I want to add some color. So let's say it's the top mat. First of all, I'm going to use the eyedropper tool because most of the time when you're picking mat board colors, you're generally picking them from the image anyway. Let's say I pick this off-white or white here, zoom back out, and then I'm going to get my paint bucket tool and drop that onto this layer. It's this layer here. Now I'm going to grab this layer and bring it back on top. So you can see now that's going to be my top mat color. And then I might want to add another layer. So we go Layer, New, and this layer, which I'll put underneath here, and I'll turn this layer off for now, is going to be the bottom mat, the highlight color. So here now I can pick another color, maybe of this sand color texture here. So I've picked that sand color, go to my paint bucket tool, drop that down. So my top mat's going to be white, my bottom mat's going to be sand color. Now it's just a matter of showing the bevel and the reveal. Now the way we do that is I'm going to use my lasso tool. Generally when you're cutting a mat, you're usually cropping the image a little bit, and likewise we're going to do the same here in Photoshop. I created a lasso using the image here as a guide, and my bottom mat, which is this one, I'm going to cut that out. And because the lasso is now on this layer, by the way, I've got to check my feathering here. That's got to be set to 0. And I'll do that again. So now in the bottom layer, I'm going to hit the delete key, and that will remove a rectangle. I'm going to remove these layers so you can see. But now I've got a hole in the mat board, just like if I cut it with a mat cutter. So I can now move this below that layer and then turn it back on, and you can see, okay, it's underneath that layer now, and it's been cropped a little bit all the way around the edges, just like we would do in real life. And now we've got the white layer on top, and I want to crop that. So I'm going to bring this layer on top, bring this here, and I want to use my rectangle lasso tool again, and then I'm going to make an even selection, say a 5mm step or whatever, around that rectangle. Now you can type in dimensions or whatever if you want, but you get the idea. I now go to this layer and click on delete to remove that selection, move that layer back on top. So now you can see we have our top mat, our middle mat, and our bottom mat. Now you can also play around and move things. If I unselect, click in nowhere, and say select this layer, you can use the arrow keys to move things around and realign things as we need to. Same with the image. I can move that around to line it up if I need to. I was using the arrow keys there. Now it doesn't look too realistic, does it? You've just got flat colors. How do we make it look three-dimensional and realistic like real mat board? Well, here's the secret. First of all, we're going to select a layer, double click it so we can bring up the layer style options. And here what we want to do is we want to go to stroke, and we want to set the color for our stroke the same as mat board color, which is not white, it's a little bit gray or off-white. And if I move this out of the way so you can see here, I've got to set the stroke distance to look realistic like normal mat board. So I'm going to set that, say, for a value of 10 pixels. And if I zoom in here, you can see now we have a bit of a bevel. Likewise, I can grab the white layer, double click, look at our layer style options, choose stroke, set this to 10, and then choose again a slight off-white or grey color. Of course, you could make a color core if you needed to do color core by choosing your color option here as well, if it's a black core or whatnot. Now, that gives us a little bit more realism with the bevel. Now we can add a little bit more realism if we want. We could add texture. If I double click this again, You can see here you've got pattern overlay. Matboard, as you know, sometimes has a texture or a pattern. If we click here, we can choose, say, this canvas weavy type pattern. Now obviously it looks really dark there, but you can also affect the opacity of this to tone it down. And we can also, I'll just darken it back up so you can see, we can also affect just how tight we make that pattern so it looks realistic or not. So this is a way you could create a fabric mat if you need to, but once you say you've got that pattern right and we can tone that down, that's one way. It may be hard to see on your screen there, but that's one way we can emulate a little bit of texture in Matboard, so you may like. One other further way we can add some realism to this is maybe add what we call a drop shadow. So again, in the same area, if I double click again for our layer style options, we can go drop shadow. I might set that from this angle here, and we can play around with these slider bars here, and you can see what's happening over here. It's creating a bit of a shadow effect underneath. So we could make it just a very subtle or slight drop shadow for, say, the top mat onto the bottom mat, but then maybe for the bottom mat itself, we can really add a little bit more of an enhanced drop shadow to create that element of depth or drama, like so. So you can see now that looks a little bit more realistic. Okay, you've got the texture there, you've got the bevel, and you've got the drop shadow. So there's our matboard layering. Now the next step is to look at framing it, and we need to cut and join the frame. Look, I love framing things in Photoshop because there's not as much material or wastage used, and when it comes to cutting and joining the frames, you always get perfect joins. Now I'm going to show you some tricks. First of all, let's say you have a length of molding like this, but you need it, before we start, we need it to be longer. And this particular molding actually has elements of texture to it. So if it didn't have texture to it, it was just like a flat black molding, some of the things you could do to make it longer would be to go to Edit, Transform, Scale, and you could just grab this and stretch it out. However, in this case, this one has got a bit of grain to it, which may look a bit deformed and unnatural. So what we might do is copy and paste that layer. So I'm going to Control A, Control C, Control V. I've actually copied this twice. And I can lay two links over the top of each other. What I could do is go to my selection tool, set a feather value of, say, 20 pixels, and I can take that selection over the top of the top layer, which is the bottom one here, and then click on delete. And what that does is, I'll just unselect so you can see, I'll click and drag this out, is it creates a fade gradient effect, which means that what I could do is try and find a way, now I'm going to use my arrow keys, to merge that over the top and get away with making a longer length out of two pieces. So if you've got a molding that happens to have a pattern on it, this selection using feathering and then overlaying it can be a handy way to pattern match, so to speak, two lengths of molding and make a longer length. Once we've got those two bits over the top of each other as two different layers, if you go right click and actually the option is off the screen down here, but right click, one of the options is merge down. What that will do is combine that layer with the layer below it, and so now we just have one layer. Okay, so that gives me one nice long length of molding that I can work with. What I need obviously is 3 more lengths, so I can go right click and we can duplicate layer, which is the same as copying and pasting. So I now have 2 layers, one is right over the top of the other, but what I can do now with this layer is I can go edit, transform, and then flip horizontal, so that if it happened to have a shape where there was a rebate, we can always say that this edge here is the rebate. Well, now this edge is the rebate. So I'm retaining the respect to which edge is the rebate. We obviously need 2 more lengths, so I can Control A to select all, Control C to copy, Control V to paste, and I can go edit, transform, rotate counterclockwise 90 degrees. That will create a top length for me, and then I can Control A, Control C, Control V, give me a bottom length, and of course to retain the integrity of which edge is the inside edge, I can rotate that 180. So now it's just a matter of joining these pieces up. If I zoom in and take a look here, I can determine the distance that I want away. Now, if you're trying to work out how to get these distances right, one of the handy things you can do is use guidelines. So you can measure out and bring in these guidelines in so that they will help you dynamically to snap your layer or edge close to that edge of molding. Now, can you see here this length of molding is still not quite long enough for me. So what I could do is I could cheat and go edit, transform, scale, and for the sake of this demo, we'll just make it longer. Enter. I can do the same with this layer too. Click on it, edit, transform, scale. Oops, I think I'll do Control Z to go back. I just want to grab that one so I don't lose the aspect or the proportion. Enter to lock that in. And then I can set all my edges. So you can imagine that I've measured it out if I want for the margin. If I want a weighted margin here, I can do so. Measure out where I want to put this. So now it's a matter of mitering those edges and joining them up. So if I zoom in and click on this layer here, I'm now going to use my polygon lasso tool, and I'm going to draw a line here. Basically, it's mitering this edge off here. So I'm started from the inside edge there. I want to get really nice in there if I can, and come out to that edge here. I'm going to make sure I've got all of that included here. Look to join that up so that area is selected of this top layer. So then I'm going to hit the delete key, and that crops off that edge for me. I'm going to move down to this corner here, zoom in so you can see clearly, and I'll do the same thing here for the bottom. So now this area here is selected, but I've got to change here to make sure I'm on the bottom layer, which is this layer here. Okay, and then hit the delete key. Now I'm going to move across to the other side. So I'm going to start nice and tight into that corner, create my chevron, come across here, include all of that. And I'm still on the same layer, so I can hit delete there. And then, oops, I hit escape if you accidentally hit the click again. Move up to the top layer here, so I'm on the top layer now. Zoom in. I can start up here if I want. Come on down to that corner. And I've selected all that, so hit delete. I can crop that out. So now I can unselect. Now a quick way to then crop out the other extensions of that molding will be to use the crop tool. If I just set it for something slightly larger to start with, and then let this dynamically snap in, that can sometimes work easily for you, and you can zoom right in. I love the mouse wheel zoom feature if you can set it up in your preferences. I can zoom in here and crop this right up to the edge, whoops, of the molding. And on the right hand side here, I can get this one here. And I think I've already done the bottom, but let's have another look. No. Zoom in a bit more. Okay, and once you've got those set, I can hit enter, and that will just crop that image now. So we're still not finished yet. There's a few more steps. Let's say, for example, I want to add an element of realism or depth to the frame. I need to join up the frame because at the moment the frame is still made up of 4 bits. So we need to get on an underpinner and join it, so to speak. Let's merge down these 4 layers. So if I move this out here, maybe I can show you. Go back to layers because the drop-down menu goes off the screen here. But if I go right-click, merge down, that joins 5 and 4 together, and right-click, merge down again, and right-click, merge down again. So now that all 4 lengths are merged on the same layer. And what I can also do now is double click on this, use drop shadow again, and maybe set some settings there to create a little bit of depth or distance for inside the edge of the frame inside here. Can you see there that the shadowing is starting to show? Maybe we want to make it look a little bit realistic. But if I zoom in now, you might be able to see a bit of shadowing. In fact, I'll remove these guidelines. We don't need them anymore. And I'll zoom in. So can you see here now we have this extra little bit of shadow, and you can control that using these steps here. You can control the opacity of it up here as well. So that makes it look a little bit more realistic. You can even add an extra layer of realism. Let's say you've got a molding that's slightly glossy finish and you want to show an element of reflection in the molding. What you can do is create another layer. So if we go layer, new layer, and make sure this is going to be our top layer up here, so it's above all the other layers. I'm going to use my gradient tool, so go right click here, gradient tool, create a gradient, and I'll show you in the gradient editor here, that is opaque in the middle and then transparent on the edges. So you set the opacity here to 0 for these edges, set the color here to whatever, you generally make it white, but in the middle you want a white or an off-white with a full opacity of 100%. So what we can do now is if I do a little click and drag with the gradient, you can see it's created that this gradient line or blur over the top. I'll undo that. Control Z is undo. And see if we can get an angle of this that looks a little bit realistic. And then I'm going to go to this layer here with my frame, use my magic wand and select that area using the frame here to dictate that. But now I'm going to go back to this layer, hit delete. And can you see now we have what, a bit of a light flare or a light reflection. To make that maybe look a little bit more realistic, we can reduce the opacity of this in the layer style. I'll just click on nowhere land here to unselect that. But now you can see how I've created a little bit of realism with that photograph. So we have texture on the matte board, we've got drop shadows, we've got a nice bevel on our mattes, got a bit of reflection there. Maybe the last step is to possibly put it onto a wall or an image of a wall. In that particular case, what you can do is make your canvas a bit bigger again. So if we select everything and go larger and then hit enter, we now have a larger space to work with, and we want a background to work with here, so we can create a new layer, new, which will be our background layer. Now I'm going to move this layer right down to the bottom underneath everything else, and this can be our wall. So I'll choose a color for our wall, which might be, say, an off-white or a white, or it might be just pure white. And then use the right click paint bucket tool and then drop this in the background, and there you can see we have our background image there. And so what we want to do is actually create an extra drop shadow for that outside edge here. Now in order to do that we need to go back a few steps actually. That's where I love Photoshop, because we can go back in time. Let's go back to here, before our crop. What I need to do is to combine all these layers. So we go right click, merge, visible. It flattens everything, you lose the ability to adjust everything, but now that's all just one layer. Then I can make a larger selection for our canvas, which can be our wall. Use the paint bucket to drop in the background, but we do need a new layer. So we go layer, new layer, and this layer needs to be underneath, and then we can drop that. So now that's our wall color. Go back to this layer, double click it, and let's bring up some layer properties or layer styles for this. Go to drop shadow, select drop shadow, and then choose how you want the distance of this to be from the wall. So then you have a bit of an element of three-dimensional realism for it if you needed to make it look as if it was coming off the page or off the wall. So that's it. That's how you can create a high-definition professional framed image using Photoshop and frame a picture in Photoshop. Have fun with that.